Namaskar and welcome to this show of Sathology Debunking Mythology. Today we have a special guest and very popular across the world. I lovingly call him Panditji, and he is an expert in astrological calculations. And you can call it a Jyotishi in Hindi or Sanskrit, but he's a very prominent historian. He proves through astronomy, astrology, and he has been speaking on this subject for many, many years. Most of us were not even there, some of us. And so without delay, let us welcome Dr. Manish Pandit from Birmingham, UK.
Pranam and Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Krishna. And this is a very interesting week, a brilliant week, and congratulations to all of you who have been seeing the Shri Ram Mandir Bhumi Pujan, which has occurred. These are very interesting times, and you know, uh, we have been waiting for this for 492 years, ever since the temple was destroyed a long time ago in 1528, 1529 by Mir Baki by a singular act of violence. And, there were 76 attempts by the Hindus to get the temple back. And then the Peshwas also tried, and everybody tried for years and years. And finally, now, the courts have actually accepted that this was really Hindu place of worship, and they have given back to Indians their legitimate, the Hindus, legitimate right to worship over there. However, yes.
Before we start off, you mentioned 76. So there are many people who are asking questions that what did Hindus not do? But you are saying 76 attempts they made to recapture that.
And that is just a small snapshot. There must have been many, many more. My memory is not, accurate as to how many more there were and what all happened. I mean, and the number of Hindus. You see, the historians who were not Hindu have actually recorded these events in a reasonable amount of detail. And they have actually said that the Hindus used to come there at great risk to life and limb, and of course, the women used to even get raped over there. And despite all that, they used to come to have a glimpse from outside of the cherished uh, birthplace of Sri Rama. It is important to state that the importance of this place to Hindus is no less than Jerusalem or Mecca. It is having that sort of status as and it has been recognized, you see, as the birthplace even by Mir Baki. You see, even Mir Baki at that time had actually said that. And in fact, there are some very interesting records of what they say is that they tried to build, मतलब in Hindi I will say, कि जो मस्जिद की दीवार बांध रहे थे, so a lot of the times on the same evening the wall would fall. And eventually Mir Baki was given the advice that you have to name it after Sita. Otherwise, this thing will never stand at this place. Such is the power of this place. And anyway, this is all historical. Now everybody knows, courtesy the Archaeological Survey of India, that there was a temple at that site, and a huge amount of artifacts have been found, which are all Hindu in origin. So we'll not go into all that. I will go into something slightly different, and something also related to destruction and unfortunate events which have occurred in the past, but to give a more astrological sort of a shift to it. Now, normally I never go into this because for the Mahabharata, predominantly I have concentrated primarily on astronomy and not on astrology. Barring the position of Jupiter, I have almost not taken astrology into consideration as such. Nevertheless, in the old days, it was all astronomy, and astrology was sort of together, especially Mahabharata times. It was, definitely together. And I have trained as a Jyotishi when I was much younger. I was 22, and I have the Krishnamurti Jyotish Visharad. Without further ado, I will go to a interesting sort of presentation, which I'm sure a lot of you can feedback on. I will stop every few slides and come back to this screen. So I'll go to that in a second. So what I'm going to show over here is slightly different. So this is the second Saptology presentation. And what I'm going to show over here, I'm going to start with a very different sort of an approach now. Now, this is so I'm going to explain everything this time. You see, because that's the other thing. I don't want it to go, subject matter to go over people's heads. And I will connect it to events in history also. I want to specifically go back to World War II in this particular instance. But the connection of Mars in Gandanta. Now, we all know about Mars. So I don't need to explain what Mars is. Graha. Gandanta, what does Gandanta mean? So Gandanta is in Jyotish applicable to specific points of the zodiac. So 26 degrees 40 minutes of Pisces, every Rashi is 30 degrees. So that to 3 degrees 20 of Aries. Okay, 26 degrees 40 minutes of Cancer to 3 degrees 20 of Leo, and 26 degrees 40 minutes of Scorpio to 3 degrees 20 of Sagittarius. This is a very interesting sort of a concept which I am trying to put over here. And what is that Gandanta? I'll come back to the other slide in a moment. If you can see over here, this is the South Indian way of casting a horoscope. That is Mesha or Aries, then that is Taurus. And these are zodiacal divisions now I'm talking about. I'm not talking about nakshatras over here as such. And then you have Mithuna or Gemini, and then you got Cancer. So I'm going to point out 3 points. First is that this is Pisces and that is Aries, and this junction between the two is a Gandanta. 3 degrees roughly to either side is called as a Gandanta. It is not a good position for any transiting planet in the sky to occupy. And these are things which have been known in India for thousands of years. There is mention of Gandanta in classics of astrology, of Jyotish, in specific Sanskrit verses. And there are different types of Gandanta. Then the second point is between Cancer and between Leo. Again, you will see it is a water sign and it is a fire sign. And then finally between Scorpio and Sagittarius over here. And 3 degrees to either side of this is always a Gandanta. And I have illustrated over here what exactly that means. 26 degrees 40 of Pisces, so you can go back over here. So 26 degrees 40 of Pisces to 3 degrees 20 of Aries over here. And similarly with Cancer and Leo, and similarly with Scorpio and Sagittarius. And I want to just show you a few examples of how this plays out when actually you look at the sky and you actually look at what actually happens. Is an association. I do not want to bring in causation into it, because a lot of the people, they have this thing that it is a causation which is occurring, that Mars is actually causing it. No, it may or may not. I cannot comment on that because that is beyond the purview of any sort of science. But what I can say is that there is an association. And how is that association? Let me show you 2 events separated by 10 years. And let me show you what happened. So, as you know, there was this air crash which occurred. Air India flight 1344 crashed yesterday on attempted landing. And it skidded onto very, very difficult sort of a tabletop airport. There are 2 airports like that in India, and it will fascinate you to, and it's a terrible tragedy, and I want to offer my condolences to all involved. So this is completely academic discussion which I am trying to do over here on how the analysis goes. So there are 2 of these airports like that. One is in Mangaluru, and the other one is over here in, I think, Kozhikoda, this is. And I want to point out the position of Mars. Mars is in Gandanta, roughly 28 degrees of Pisces yesterday, 27 degrees of Pisces. I am using over here Pushyapaksha or Revata Paksha or Ramana Ayanamsha only for mundane disasters. That is what I use. And you can see that it is quite clearly fitting the description and the whatever definition of Gandanta which we are putting. So it is over here, definitely. Okay. And that was on that day of 7th of August. I've just put the chart over here for the 8th, just to show you that it is actually approaching Gandanta, deep Gandanta. It will go to 0 degrees, then it will go here. It will actually go back in retrogression. And I want to show you the previous crash which occurred, the previous notable crash which has occurred in the last 10 years is the one in 2010 on 22nd of May. And I want to show you again Mars. And I want to show you that Mars is again in Gandanta. And it is at 29 degrees of Cancer on the 22nd of May of 2010. That was Air India flight A12. Again, it was an attempted landing. Now, be it as it may be, I am not taking away anything from all the heroic attempts by whoever was flying the plane, and by the rescue crew and all those things. That is perfectly fine, and that is not the purpose of my discussion at all. But what I'm trying to say over here is that there are two such crashes which are occurring, and they are both connected to Mars in Gandanta. And that is not the only thing. That is not the only thing. I mean, this is a very, very interesting sort of analysis. And of course, there are numerous loopholes in any Jyotish or astrological analysis. It is not a pure science. So therefore, there will be lots of full loopholes, and you may critique it as you wish, because I will also criticize it anyway. Because that is the way science goes. Okay. So I will criticize this in any case, but it is an interesting point to note. Is it a coincidence? Okay, so this is one thing. So I was looking at it and I found something else. I want you to look at Saturn, and Saturn is very nearly at the same degrees in both the cases in our Earth sign. Okay, and I will show you that again. So this is from the 7th, 8th of August. Saturn is at roughly 4 degrees and it is in Capricorn. There are 3 Earth signs, of course, and Capricorn and Virgo are 2 of them, which we are going to point out in a moment. So this is that Saturn, which is, and you can see this green, this red box around this particular planet, which indicates that it is in retrogression. Okay, and retrogression is a very interesting sort of a condition. It is only something which you observe from the Earth. Okay, I'm only again pointing out association, but I'm going to show you something in a moment. And this Saturn will go stationary in a few days, in the sense that it will go stationary, it will stop, and then it will be seen to stop. It will not really stop, but it will be seen to stop from the Earth's point of view, and then it will move in a different direction. Forward again. And 10 years ago, Saturn was at 5 degrees over Virgo in 2010 of May on the 22nd on that particular day. Nearly exactly the same degree, in fact. If you, go into the number of minutes which are involved, it's virtually within a degree. Okay. It is also retrograde. Okay, by the way. It is also surrounded by that red box. Okay, this is another very interesting. Is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence? Because in science, always it can always be a coincidence. We always say. But this is the second point I'm making now. Now I'm going to show you the third point. In both cases, Saturn is about to go stationary in that Earth sign. This Saturn at 4 degrees of Capricorn was in Vakra motion. It will go stationary in a few days, as I just mentioned. Okay, and I'm going to show you. So this is the 7th of August of 2020, and I'm going to go back to the 22nd of May of 2010 to that other crash. And at that point, Saturn at 5 degrees of Virgo in 2010 May will go stationary in roughly a week's time. And now, of course, there will be numerous skeptics over there who will be sitting and they will be saying, well, Pandit ji अपना ऐसे ही बोल रहे हैं कि stationary जाएगा, तो मैं उन लोगों के लिए थोड़ा सा दिखाने जा रहा हूँ ये कि 22nd of May 2010, I'm just going to show you the ephemeris over here. That is Saturn on the 22nd. And you can see within a week, roughly, it is going to go stationary. So it is going to end its R is denoting the retrogression of Vakragati or motion, and it is going to go in direct motion. And why should that be? I mean, these are things which I'm just saying, whoever wants to study these things should study these things in this sort of detail, go into them very deeply, find out, maybe you can find out about all the air disasters, where exactly Saturn was, where Mars was, whether they were about to go into retrogression, were they in retrogression, were they in Gandanta, and so on and so forth. And probably some interesting data may emerge. Of course, please note that Western astrology and Vedic astrology are miles apart, because Western astrology is taking into account the precession of the equinoxes and has done so for the last 5,000, 6,000 years. It is a fact which is attested to by John Playfair of Royal Society of Edinburgh, and it is there in his paper also. And so this is the difference between, so that is one of the key differences between Indian astronomy and Western astronomy. That is the one point I want to also make. Now, the question is, of course, so this is just Mars in Gandanta. All I am saying is Mars in Gandanta, right?
Dr.
Anji.
Dr. Pandit, 1 minute, like who do you think is more accurate, the Western or the Vedic?
See, the Vedic system has a great advantage that there are 3 or 4 things which are very different about it, which the Western system has got absolutely no idea about, unfortunately. I mean, it is worth learning by the Western system. But the issue is there are few things. One, they take into position the tropical signs. They do not take into consideration the precession of the equinoxes. So because the precession of the equinoxes is not taken into consideration, suppose I say, I don't know what year, what month were you born, for example, and what is your sun sign by Western standards? Aditya ji, आपका sun sign क्या है by Western standards?
Western standards, Scorpio, and दूसरा है वृश्चिक.
हाँ, so Scorpio से suppose आप लें वो, तो your what is your birth date? Sorry, आपने बताया birthday क्या है आप?
5th November.
Ah, fantastic. Okay. So on 5th of November, since I happen to know the ephemeris in my head for the position of the sun, your sun will be in 18 degrees of Libra. It is not in Scorpio, as the Westerners have thought it to be. And so that sun basically in Libra is actually in a nakshatra called Swati, right? So when it is in Swati nakshatra, the interest of the person always goes towards esoteric subjects, sciences, and so on and so forth. So you will have, for example, just on the basis of this very, very basic thing, I can tell you your interest in religion will be quite high. Your interest in Jyotish will be high. There are reasons for this, and there is a 13-degree orb only, by the way. So in 3 days' time, and that is just based on the sun, by the way, because the sun in Swati is considered to be one of the most fortunate positions for the position of the sun and for Jyotish and so on and so forth in general. So that is one point, that the Eastern system is far more sukshma, and it has the advantage of nearly 4,000 years at least what we know of advances. That is number one. Number two, the Indian system benefits from something called as the dasha system, and there are approximately 77 well-known rather dashas, and at least 110 dashas in total. So 30 more dashas approximately, which are not so well known to astrologers, even to the Jyotishis of India. This used to be one of my pet projects at one time, to find out whether what graha in what dasha will give what effect and so on and so forth. And the timing systems, unfortunately this is a Mac computer, but next time I will show on a Windows computer. I can show exactly what I mean by dasha systems. So they are timing systems, and the timing systems of Hindu astrology are so amazing that that is the reason why the system is predictive. And that is why the Western system predictions are discouraged in general. It is all about what the person's character will be, or what the person's makeup will be, and so on and so forth, mental makeup. There's a lot of psychology involved in that. The Indian system for the dasha, because of the dasha systems, tends towards prediction, and that is something which Westerners, I think, is very difficult for them to understand until and unless they study it. Of course, now you've got hordes and hordes of Westerners like Hart Defau, Robert Svoboda, and David Frawley. And there's so many, Jeffrey Armstrong. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of astrologers from the West who have actually taken it up, found it to be true, and or found it to be reasonably accurate, shall we say, because it is not a science. It is not a pure science, and it is a flawed science, and therefore it needs good sort of person on the side, basically whoever is interpreting the data. So that is the other point which I wanted to make. So, but within those limits, the Hindu system is really, really quite remarkable in the amount of depth of the analysis which it can actually offer, and plus the divisional charts. So those are all things which are not there in the Western system. And the other problem with the Western system is, of course, that hardly anybody really studies it from a very young age. Who is going to study Indian astrology from a young age? In India, you got, I know people who have been studying astrology they have 40 years of age, they've been studying for 34 years. They've been studying from the age of 6. so this is, the other problem, because the more you study and the more the ephemeris has to be in your head. I know people, Hardev ji, for example, who used to do the almanacs, at the foothill of the Himalayas. He used to have the whole ephemeris in his head. Krishnamurti, the person who formulated Krishnamurti Paddhati, or one of the very famous Paddhatis of south of India, the man who predicted on Chennai airport, he predicted that a plane will land, and the traffic control people weren't able to tell when the plane will land, and it landed at that time. Okay. Or a person, I've seen astrologers in Maharashtra, Jyotish, I think Hasbe, Jyotindra Hasbe, one of the famous Jyotishis, who predicted to the exact minute when electricity will come back again, right? Which is a huge problem in India, with the power cuts and all that. So to the exact minute, right? I mean, what I'm trying to say is not that it is it's super great and it's absolutely, it is the only thing which, it is the cat's whiskers. No. But what I'm saying is that the mathematical odds of predicting that are very, very difficult. And as scientists, we should take note of those things. That if somebody is able to predict it even once, this is not just once, I mean, hundreds of people have predicted these things, I'm saying. But even if you predict it once, the mathematical odds of predicting it, as you know, I don't know how much interested you are in factorials and things like that. But I have calculated the odds, and it's 1 in a million, that you will be able to predict the exact time when electricity will return. I mean, and if it turns out to be true. This was one of my questions in the Krishnamurti Paddhati question paper. And in 1993, I had predicted exactly what time a person was born. I mean, it was a handwritten paper. I stood fourth in the state, and I had predicted between 5 and 7, or I think it was within a 12-hour period. I can't remember now, but what exact time a person was born. There are other predictions I've given at that time, but I mean, I don't tend to give predictions, and I don't tend to go towards that sort of thing anymore, because it makes people very fatalistic also. And I don't quite like that. I prefer that people work hard. The harder you work, the luckier you get, as some people have said. So I'll go to my next point, which I think is highly important. And so what is the concept or connection of planetary movements, or especially like Mars, to great wars? I want to go towards Heinz Guderian, because Heinz Guderian was one of the Panzer commanders in World War II. And he was the person who notoriously, got the Blitzkrieg into action. And of course, the Blitzkrieg is what got the Axis troops their biggest victories in Belgium and those sort of places. However, we should be very lucky. We should count ourselves very lucky that they did not win. And why they did not win, I want to show you of one or two events only, very interesting events. As we know, that Heinz Guderian was in August 1941. He was, well, in July 1941, he was going towards Moscow. And actually, they were 30 miles from Moscow. And at that point, Hitler, for some reason, decided that he will allow the troops basically to go, the armored cars would go towards Leningrad in the north and towards Ukraine in the south. Now, this led to one of the greatest losses for the Soviet army in that particular time, in the encirclement at Kiev, which occurred in 1941. One of the greatest losses the Soviet army, which actually they had. But the interesting point is that Heinz Guderian and the head of the German generals was a man called Halder. And Halder and Guderian both protested very violently. They said, let us take Moscow, right? So they wanted to take Moscow, right? And we are very lucky that they did not take Moscow. Otherwise, it would have really changed the course of the war had they done so. But I want to point out what happened. There was a massive fight between Heinz Guderian, Halder, and Hitler. In fact, Halder was close to resigning. He didn't resign in the end, but he offered to resign, right? And Heinz Guderian also said all this. These are all matters of record now. I mean, it is all well known. And Heinz Guderian, in fact, went back to the Wolf's Lair. Yeah, I don't know how many of you are that interested in World War II history, but the Wolf's Lair is where Hitler used to hold all his meetings. And he went all the way over there, and everybody told him, don't say a word to Hitler about this. But this man, he was a very courageous general. We have to give him credit for that. And he said that, well, you have to absolutely make sure that you take Moscow. And Hitler simply said, no, we'll continue with taking Ukraine and Leningrad and all this crap. And we were very lucky that that his mind was under the control of Mars. And how it happened, I want to show you over here. Look at this again. I have already pointed out Mars in Gandanta, what it means. Here is 28 degrees of Pisces of Mars. You can see the movement very, very clearly. Now, Mars, they say when it goes backward or in Vakragati, has a very, very peculiar movement, right? And this has been under study by astronomers like, right from Kepler and all these people. They've all studied the Vakragati or the retrograde movement of Mars and come to various scientific conclusions. But look at the association. Again, I'm not in any way suggesting causation, but it is interesting. And if you look at this, you will see that if you go down over here, that is on the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 23rd of July, and in August over here, somewhere over here, when it has gone in Vakragati, Heinz Guderian was with Hitler in the Wolf's Lair. And that Vakragati or retrogression of Mars and its effect on Hitler's head. Well, causation, association, whatever you want, but just look at it. You can see it so clearly over here, right? And that thing is what has saved the Soviets. It has saved, the entire free world, because otherwise there would have been chaos in the world, right? But what I'm saying is that this man, he was obviously, because he is a battle commander, please note also that the person who is in the battlefield is not as affected by that Mars as the person who is sitting very much remotely away from it, like Hitler was. And Hitler was a typical Mesha Rashi, was a typical Mesha person, Aries person. And this had a devastating effect on Hitler. This sort of Gandanta retrogression of Mars was terrible for him. And please note that it goes backward over there. You will see it again goes back into Pisces. Can you see over there? And these, once that happened, certain other things also happened. And of course, the attack to Moscow was aborted on 23rd of August of 1941. And that was called, the original directive was called Directive 33. where the infantry was to continue to Moscow and armored cars went to Leningrad in the north and Ukraine in the south. And let us go a bit differently, So he swung to Kiev. The encirclement of troops occurred in Kiev. Soviet army was devastated in Kiev. But, I mean, the Soviets, if you study battle tactics and all these sort of things, you will see that the Russians are, one of the most resolute and, what do you call it, strike people on earth. And then, of course, came this Saturn at Rohini, right? And Saturn at Rohini, well, what can Saturn at Rohini do, right? Well, we shall show you what Saturn at Rohini can do. And its connection to the Mahabharata is, of course, very well known. And I just want to point out the verses in the Mahabharata about Saturn at Rohini, because I want to just connect it to a few verses on that. And because I don't want to make it too boring for people, because otherwise people will be really bored कि ये श्लोका bombing कर रहे हैं, तो श्लोका bombing बिल्कुल I don't want to do any shloka bombing, but I want to point out the two verses, out of the four verses, a lot of the people, they justify taking all these other positions of Saturn, purported positions of Saturn. But there are two verses in two separate books of the Mahabharata, in the Udyoga Parva, in the Bhishma Parva, which are both pointing to Saturn at Rohini. And Saturn at Rohini is a feared phenomenon. It's a feared phenomenon. And I'll tell you in a moment why it is feared. So these are the two verses. Prajapatyam hi nakshatram grahastikshto mahanti.
मैं थोड़ा सा इंटरवीन करूंगा.
हाँ, करिए बिल्कुल करिए.
श्लोका बॉम्बिंग मैं सिर्फ उन लोगों के लिए बोलता हूँ जो कि श्लोका बोलते हैं लेकिन मतलब नहीं समझते, वो दूसरों को चुप कराने के लिए. बट अगर आपके जैसे लोग हैं जिनको people who understand shloka, it's good for you to use because that gives us credence.
नहीं, वो जरूर, it's very very kind of you to say that. I am simply giving a few shlokas over here because shlokas are useful to tell people, look, here is the shloka which is telling that.
It's a reference.
Reference है, हाँ, मतलब शब्द प्रमाण ना, मतलब हाँ, कुछ लोग बोलते हैं कि भाई शब्द प्रमाण सिर्फ श्रुति को अप्लाई होता है और इतिहास को नहीं होता. ये सब, this is not true,
जो व्यक्ति शास्त्र में बोल रहे हैं, तो when they say that this I have taken this information from this parva, this shloka, then it actually makes it very bona fide.
Right, exactly. And this is an astronomy reference, so it has to be really quoted. And you can see the second part of it, Shaneshchara Pidayati Pidayan Praninodikam. Now, Pida is, of course, and to Rohini, this is Prajapatyam hi nakshatram. So this is nakshatra ruled by Prajapati. There's only one nakshatra really, which is Rohini. And the other one, it says Rohini Impida in Nesham. It mentions Rohini by name over there. Rohini Impida in Nesham Sthito Rajan Shaneshchara. So, it is stationed in Rohini. There's no doubt in these two verses now that Saturn is at Rohini. So Saturn is causing Pida to Rohini, Saturn is at Rohini, and Saturn at Rohini is known to be a really, really horrible transit of Saturn for the entire world. In fact, the Varahamira's Brihat Samhita also mentions that it is a very, very bad position, right? And the various astrological treatises, right down to even Stotra Mahatmyas are mentioning. Shani Mahatmya, today is a Saturday, by the way, also mentions that, Raja Dashrath Krit Shani Stotra is there. And he says, this is a bad position, right? So you have to be very, very careful of this particular position. And this sort of almost establishes Saturn at Rohini. This Bhishma Parva verse is there, which is basically the verse which is actually after the Arundhati Vashishta verse, which I will cover in perhaps the next session or the session after that. And why that particular verse is, this is a nimitta. And why nimitta? Because the Rohini Pida in Nesham, Sthito Rajan Shaneshwara, how long? It is for maximum 6 months a year, not more than that, right? So we are talking about a small period of time when it is actually causing Pida. And that too, it is a Nakshatra Pida, it is not a Rashi Pida over here. There are no real Rashis are there mentioned in the Mahabharata text. And I'm giving you the verses also over there. So this is important. And I will go on to the other thing, because what happens after that August of 1941 is that you land up in a situation where there are horrible, conditions. The rain starts, the trucks of the Nazis actually get stuck, and then eventually the Russian winter starts. And the Russian winter, when it starts, I mean, it is a horrible thing. The panzers basically are gone. The weapons are frozen. I mean, nobody can really move. And also, the Russians are far better adapted to it than the Germans are. And eventually, the Russian women come and attack the German troops, eventually. So, and that too with the pitchforks, all made up of lokhand, made up of iron, right? Which is another indication of Saturn, by the way. So, I mean, all the great machinery, the war machinery of the Germans completely, collapsed in that Russian winter. And this is, by the way, the Saturn about to pierce the Rohini Nakshatra. Over here, you can see very clearly in July of 1942. You can see the screen cap over here, which is there. I mean, maybe whenever I feed back to Redshift and all these other people, I'll feedback that these lines need to be slightly more thicker, if possible, so that people will see them a bit better. Which is why I have, put this red cap over it. And that is, of course, a verse from Brihat Samhita, which I will not really go into, but it sort of says similar sort of thing. And now people will ask, well, is that the only time it happened? If it is the only time, then, well, it's sort of, I mean, it's superfluous, it may be a coincidence. Well, let's look at it. Saturn at Rohini is a legendary position. Every Jyotishi, whoever, wherever they may be, they all know Saturn at Rohini is not good, right? It's not a good position. And if you look back at the last time Saturn was at Rohini, it was 9/11, right? And in fact, the stationary movement of Saturn was exactly almost to the day of this particular terrorist attack. And if you go back 29 and a half years before that, you will find that the Bangladesh genocide, one of the worst genocides ever to occur, where between 400 and 600,000 women were raped by the Pakistani army. And, in fact, it was in the news a few years ago where the war criminals were finally, hanged or given, there was some justice, some semblance of justice and closure was done in Bangladesh. So that happened also. Saturn was at Aldebaran or Rohini. And then World War II, I already showed you, one of the worst battles which ever occurred was that particular Saturn in that position. And then in World War I, the start of World War I is associated with Saturn at Aldebaran. And you can go back 29 and a half years, you will find some of the worst conflicts have always started whenever Saturn is at Aldebaran or at Rohini, It is well known. And depending on where it crosses and how far it crosses, maybe, future Jyotishis and astronomers can come to some sort of a classification as to what they think will happen based on what has happened in the past, So it's an interesting sort of a situation. And as we know, in 10 years, Saturn will again be at Rohini Nakshatra.
In 10 years? Okay.
10 years. In 10 years, it will be at Rohini Nakshatra. And that is not going to be that good. Of course, the difference between the Mahabharata and this is that not only Saturn at Aldebaran, but then Mars retrogression, at Jyeshtha, which is the other key point, or rather before reaching Jyeshtha and Anuradha Nakshatra. And then not just that, there are the comets, there are, the Mercury retrogression just before the war, there are hundreds of events literally occurring, all in tandem, all in that same sort of position. So that is slightly different scenario. So, I mean, okay, now a lot of people ask us why we don't take this position of Saturn. Why do we ignore verse 325, which is taken by a few researchers? And so this is verse 325, which says that Samvatsara sthayino cha graha prajulata ubhav. So it means that two ignited or luminous grahas are stationed for roughly a year. near Vishaka, Vishakayo Samipastho, near Vishaka, Samipastho, Brihaspati, Shaneshwaro, Jupiter and Saturn. And these are a conflicting sort of a position of Jupiter and Saturn, which are given in the Mahabharata. There are 4 verses for roughly for each of them, right? As I pointed out a bit earlier. Now, the problem with this verse is that the verse before, the context of this particular verse 25, the verse before that says, Grahau tamraruna shikhau prajulita bubhau saptarshi udaranam samavachhadya vaiprabham. And I will explain this verse further because it's highly important to understand this verse. The verse contains shikha. Now, I don't know how many of you watched that film Deep Impact a few years, around 22 years ago, in 1998-99, there was a film which was released. And they actually showed the Shikha in that, And if you have been seeing the pictures of Comet Neowise, you will see that Comet Neowise also has a Shikha. In fact, the very word comet is basically coming from hair, the connotation of hair for a graha. And in fact, anywhere in the world, if you go, you will find that no other celestial body is described as having hair, right? So, grahau tamra aruna shikhau. So, it means that 2 grahas with tamra aruna, orange or lighted color shikhas or hair, prajwalita, ignited, are stationed sthitau, and Saptarishi Udaranam, the great grand Saptarishi Mandala, Samavachhadya Vaiprabham, they are penetrating or obscuring, depending on what meaning of Sanskrit you take. So this is a very interesting verse because I don't know how many of you are conversant with the text. Let me see if I can just show you where the Saptarishis are. Shall I just show you that on Redshift? Do you think that's useful?
Yes, please.
So I will just show you that, and just tell me if you can see the screen in a moment. Yeah, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Of Redshift or not yet? No. Okay, 1 second. Let me just stop the share and let me just share the screen again and go there and go there. And can you see the Redshift screen now? Right. Okay, very good. So let me try and bring it over here. So where exactly are we talking about? That is the Saptarishis, Ursa Major. You can see the yellow line over here, which is the ecliptic.
Yeah.
So this is the path of the grahas, of the planets, right? And this is actually away from it, right? Number 1. Number 2, where is actually Vishaka? So you're talking somewhere over here, okay? You're talking about these sort of points. This is near Vishaka, right? Which is in, in Libra, okay? And look at the distance in the sky. I mean, you're talking about, nearly 1/4 of the zodiac away, this distance. So the question of, and let me show you what happens when Saturn comes over here. So we can sort of do that. So we can actually do that. And can you see that they're all going in a peculiar motion over here? Let me take it like that. 1 second. Yeah, okay. So here is Saturn now. Can you see? And that Saturn is near that yellow line, which is the ecliptic. And can you see, you can actually not see the Saptarishis over here. It's so far away. So the question of Jupiter or Saturn obscuring or penetrating the Saptarishis from near Vishaka is an impossibility.
Correct.
This is a logical impossibility. It is not possible, right? And so I'm just showing you that again, how far away that is, right? It's halfway across the zodiac, right? Effectively. Now, if that is the case, the only thing which can penetrate is if you had a comet which was somewhere over here, which would still class as being near Vishaka, and its tail was somewhere going nearby over here. And then it would either obscure or penetrate the Saptarishis. And they say that there are 2 comets like that. So what I did, so let me just again stop this share because I think you understood this point. And let me try and show you let me try and get rid of this, right? And let me go to a slightly different sort of a point over here, which is, I think it's over here. So, right. And let me see if I can find that. Right. So I'm just opening another document. Just going to say open. Right. And I'm again going to share the screen. And this time I'm going to share the screen of my book. And over here, can you see this now quite clearly? I think it's visible, isn't it? So what I'm trying to show you, this is in chapter 12, I actually devoted a full chapter to this particular problem. And I want to just show you, so this is the huge sort of difference which I just showed you between, Mizar or Vasishtha, basically, which I just showed you a little while ago also. But now can you see that if it was a comet, there is a possibility that it will come near, and with the tail, it might actually come quite near to the Saptarishis. So that is the only way that this very tricky sort of condition can be satisfied. Now the question arises, why would Vyasa or these sort of people call these grahas to be sort of Jupiter and Saturn? That's number one, right? And number two, which two comets in 3067 BCE can we actually see that there are two comets? Do that, right? I can actually show two comets. So I want to show over here for the viewers the path of comet Blancpain, which is 289, I think, P in 3067 BCE. And you can see that very clearly, how clearly it is there, Vishaka Nakshatra and this particular thing. It only needs to be near it in any case. And I also want to show you the path of comet Soho, which also comes quite near. And in fact, with the tail, it would be almost certainly, in 3067 BC. And it's there for a year, because that is the other condition which has to be satisfied. That is to be there for 1 year, roughly. So it is there for the greater part of the year. And in my next presentation, hopefully I will show the other thing which I've got is that they have to be viewable by telescopes. And almost certainly our Mahabharata astronomers would have had telescopes. There's no question about it. They were in existence at other parts of the world also. And in fact, you can prove it up to 2000, I think 500 BCE for the Chinese in any case. And you can prove that the Egyptians already had that not that long ago. So, but I just wanted to show that Comet Soho, Comet Blancpain, two very clear comets are over there. And I'll just stop that share for a second. Now the question then arises, why will they call it as Brihaspati Shaneshcharo? Well, the thing is, it may be because they already knew about the family of comets. Comets have a family in the sense that they come from either the family of Jupiter or the family of Saturn, or the origin basically, or whether it was their approach when they actually came in at some point, whether that was between Jupiter and Saturn when they were in the sky. I mean, these are all points which are worth thinking about. But this was one thing which I wanted to sort of show. I don't know how much time we have remaining.
No, people are very, very interested. I mean, everyone is watching. I've not seen anyone leave so far.
Okay, I mean, I will. In that case, I will continue with one or two more, very interesting points.
You're showing
so let me.
Earlier, you were showing the slides, so please bring them back. You're showing
Right. I'll go back to that. Yes. Okay. So here are the slides again. So what I'm saying is that no planet, neither Jupiter nor Saturn, I've just shown you the Pratyaksha Pramana, in front of your eyes, I've shown you that it's impossible for any planet, no matter how bright it is, it will never obscure or penetrate the Saptarishis. This is an impossibility. So this makes the whole sort of that verse, which is coming afterwards about Vishakayo Samipastho, Brihaspati Shaneshcharo, it makes it very feeble, number one. Number two, I also want to point out again that is one verse with a conflicting verse describing yet another position of Saturn at verse number 14 in the same chapter. Whereas these two are so strong because there is no conflicting verse to them. In either of those chapters, Bhishma 2, chapter 2, or Udyoga Parva, chapter 141, there is no other conflicting position of Jupiter, of Saturn, which is present, right? And they are both, Udyoga Parva 141.7 and Bhishma 2.32, are both describing the same position of Saturn at Rohini. And we know Saturn at Rohini is really bad. We already have seen all these examples. So the Pratyaksha Pramana is there, the Anumana is there, the Shabda Pramana is there, right? So we have got 3 out of those are absolutely, 3 out of 3 are pick-packed, right? Plus the conflicting positions for the other 2 make them really, really weak, right? They are weak positions. So these 2 should not be considered. And I've already shown why this one, which is considered by a lot of people to be, a bona fide position of Saturn and in fact of Jupiter, why it is so wrong. I have already shown you that this Shikha completely invalidates this sort of verse for being Jupiter and Saturn, or at least it puts it in considerable doubt, right? This is highly important. So that means Saturn must be at Rohini. And now this is for all your viewers and all the people who are hosting it in different universities. Do you know, are you aware that, and it always brings a smile to my face whenever I always say this, that there is only one research out of the 110 plus, 120 nearly researches which have ever emerged on the Mahabharata. Now recently there was one more, but out of all those historical researches and all the well-known researches, there is only one which points to Saturn at Rohini during the Mahabharata war, and that is 3067 BC. Now, how odd is this, given the fact that I've shown you all this evidence for Saturn at Rohini? Now, some people may say to me, Pandit ji, aap wo Shani Maharaj pe hi aap wo, you are dependent on Saturn, because a lot of people don't like Saturn, I mean, Saturn is न्यायाधीश, हमको शनिदेव से कोई शिकायत नहीं है, मतलब हम तो हाथ जोड़ के खड़े हैं हम सत्य के पुजारी हैं, तो we are in service of the truth, so there is no problem for us. But to people who say this, that you are dependent on Saturn or Rahu or whatever it is, or all these things, I want to just point out that this is the power of Saturn. Okay, that Saturn is bringing to light perfectly that Saturn has to be at Rohini. Now, whatever else you do in the Mahabharata, and there are a lot of other things which people do, but Saturn must be at Rohini. And if this is the only research which is pointing out Saturn at Rohini, then I'm afraid that this must be true. This is the only research which must be considered, therefore. All the other researchers, I'm afraid they have completely missed the wood for the trees, or, they've completely forgotten what research they were doing, right? It's quite an important thing I'm saying over here. And I'm not saying it with any malice or anything like that. As a researcher, as a fellow researcher only, I'm saying this. And I think Aditya ji understands my feelings anyway. मेरा कोई इसमें पर्सनल लाभ नहीं है, मतलब अगर किसी ने कल बोल दिया भाई आपका रिसर्च पूरा हमने डिबंक कर दिया, तो मैं हाथ जोड़ूंगा, मैं बोलूंगा बहुत अच्छी बात है, हम और रिसर्च करेंगे, कोई इशू नहीं हमारा कोई इससे ईगो का कोई ये नहीं है, ये हमारे, this is our heritage, this is the dharovar, right? We I have to take into consideration everything and arrive at the right inferences. Then that makes some usefulness, right, for everybody. And so हमारा कोई ego नहीं है इसमें, है ना आदित्य जी, correct?
I know that. So Dr. Manish, one question here, Dr. Pandit,
बताइए.
is since when you see there's a conversation between Vyasadev and Ganesh, that Ganesh won't write anything unless he understands Ganesh ji. So this apparent contradiction, how do you explain that? And did Ganesh ji misunderstood, or Vyasadev spoke something else?
No, if Vyasadev has said it and Ganesh ji has said it, then there can be no contradiction. No, there is contradiction, and all that is for us foolish people.
Yes.
You see, we have to consider what exactly he's saying. So Ganesh ji, there is an interesting thing which I would like to point out over here. And the Ganesh festival will start in a few days, and unfortunately, the celebrations will be very muted. And as people who know me will know that I have been at the forefront of promoting Ganesh Homa for years and years, and there are good reasons for that. Because if you look at what Ganesha is, there is a head of an elephant which has been transplanted, but something has been cut first. There are two things which are happening. One is there's a destruction, and just like in nature, also it happens. There's a destruction, and then there is a creation, and then there is a sthiti. So sthiti, srishti, lay. ये तीनों का वहाँ मिश्रण हो रहा है, right? So what is happening first? There is a cutting, and what are you cutting? You're cutting the normal head. And what does the normal head contain? It contains doubts, misconceptions, fears. Hundreds of things are there encapsulated in that head. And what is happening when you are transplanting, supposedly, मतलब आप जब वो गणेश जी का सिर वहां डाल रहे हैं, तो you are putting an elephant's head, and that is a transmutation. So there is a a symbolism which is deeply attached, which is subliminal meaning, which is below the surface of what normal people will just understand. You forget about whether it was a surgery or all that. I mean, that I won't even get into all that. I don't consider any of that of any great importance. But what I consider of importance is the subliminal meaning, right? Because whenever a head is shown cut in any of the literature of India, that cut head has numerous meanings, right? Depending on who is holding it. So the Devi is shown holding a cut head, right? And that is the cut head, the numerous innumerable cut heads which are there are all the misconceptions and everything. She has taken all those things away from the devotees and put them, around her head. The cut heads may also denote a Varnamala of Sanskrit. You see, the power of words. It may also, in this particular case, be the power or the force of transformation and of transmutation. So Ganesh ji, therefore, not understanding is an impossibility. Because it is at the going, his understanding is going at the speed of light, and the normal person's understanding is going is unfortunately going like a normal car is going at 30 miles an hour.
There is a very popular misconception, and we can discuss at a later time. Today we will complete this topic. Very popular conception that 8,800 shloka are the original shloka of Mahabharata. There's a misconception. Actually, the Vyasdev says that 8,800 shlokas in the 100,000 shlokas which are available for the Manushya are the most complex ones, which either he understands or Shukdev Goswami understands, or Sanjay may or may not understand. So, but Ganesh ji is impossible for misunderstanding.
नहीं गणेश जी का कोई मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग है नहीं यहाँ. ये आदमियों का मूर्खता है कि वो पढ़त मूर्ख बोल के एक वो देयर इज अ वेरी फेमस सेंट कॉल्ड रामदास स्वामी, who was there in Maharashtra, and very famous saint. Even today people claim to get darshan of Ramdas Swami. In fact, I once met somebody who I had advised one sadhana, and after nearly 4 months he actually got pratyaksha darshan of Ramdas Swami, and he was a changed person after that. And that particular person, and there's a long time ago, it's nearly 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that must be. And this saint once he's written a book, treatise called Das Bodh, and in Das Bodh there is a beautiful chapter called Murkhan Se Lakshana, which मतलब लोगों के लिए मैं क्षमा चाहता हूँ. मतलब रामदास स्वामी ने कहा है, मतलब मैंने नहीं कहा है, बट इन एनी केस, एंड रामदास स्वामी भी वैसे भी क्षमा ही चाहते हैं. मतलब सबसे वो खुद कहते हैं, वो हर चैप्टर के एंड में कहते हैं कि मैं क्षमा चाहता हूँ अगर दुख पहुंचा हो आपको. बट मूर्ख लक्षण. And I read it when I was young, and it had a very profound. It left a profound impact on my mind that one should identify the characteristics of murkta in oneself and try and remove them. Of course, it's impossible to remove all of them being a normal human, and therefore one errs one always makes mistakes. But this much is true that he also says, the padhat murkha. तो पढ़त मूर्ख मतलब एजुकेटेड इडियट, मतलब ऐसे बहुत लोग होते हैं कि जिनको लगता है कि हम ही हैं बहुत बड़े तोप ना, वी आर द ग्रेटेस्ट तोप ना, मतलब कैनन्स, एंड एक्चुअली इट्स अ मिसफायरिंग कैनन, मतलब so all I want to say, I mean, is this is a laughable thing. You see, Ramdas Swami, just to educate a few viewers who may be watching, if you ever go to have the saubhagya of going to Sajjangarh, do go there and see the big copper vessels which are there. And the Shishyas used to go alone, carrying one of them down and then all the way down the Gad, and then fill it with water and get it all the way up. And I mean, I would dare you to even lift it when it is empty. Never mind when trying to do it, it was full. And same thing applies to the sword of Shivaji Maharaj, which is kept, I think, Pune University. You try and lift it sometime, I mean, these things, and try and put on chainmail and all that armor and go and fight somewhere. I mean, you will not be able to get up, never mind fight. So even the humans of just 200-300 years ago, physically and mentally, you can see some of the changes which are occurring, and we are becoming intellectual pygmies, unfortunately. And so padhat murkha, ye jo shabd hai, I think is very nicely applicable to a lot of these people who, I mean, you should have a valid criticism. आपका criticism valid होना चाहिए, आपको आना चाहिए, संस्कृत आनी चाहिए. You should know Sanskrit, you should know how to dissect it out, you should know how to, I mean, so criticism is fine. So if you can validly demolish something, criticize something, I perfectly accept that there is a criticism of it. But just to say something अपना वो ट्विटर पे बहुत एक कॉमन चीज है, I have studied 2 Vedas. I mean, you go and see your face in the mirror, I always tell them. मतलब in 19 just एक छोटा चुटकुला सुना देता हूँ मैं, तो लोगों को जरा अच्छा लगेगा. 1998 I went to my Ved Guru, Fatak Guruji, and I had a brief gap of 40 days to learn. And somehow or the other, I wanted to learn Pauman Sukta. I mean, God knows why I wanted to learn it. I mean, all those things are all there. I had a dream and all that, and I wanted to learn it. And of course, eventually he decided to teach me. And I tell you, 3 hours sitting every day, reciting one after the next. And he used to never wince, not a word, मेरा pronunciation इतना खराब था, इतना गलत था. And then eventually, a year later, it started to click after I'd gone back to England, and I was practicing every day. And then in 2000, so this is 1998, and 2001, I thought I got a reasonably good rendition of Pauman Sukta, which is 635 riches, and is one Sukta. Then after that, I learned Rudram, and then I started learning Ghanapat and things like that, just like that, haphazardly. Kramapat, etc. I learned certain things, and to a reasonable amount. I mean, but to learn 2 Vedas, ये बकवास है, मतलब this is all nonsense. Yeah. So it's worthwhile that people understand. When somebody says they have read 2 Vedas, well, whatever you have read, you didn't understand, and whatever you understood of that, also you misunderstood most of it. So.
It's too big. And also,
these is in Sanskrit, and you forget about all that. You try to read the commentaries of, I'm not telling you, but I'm telling, the people who claim all these things, you please try and read the commentaries of Shankaracharya, and you'll begin to understand the level of delusion into which most people are. Just the commentary of Shankaracharya will take you, 5-10 साल तो ऐसे ही निकल जाएगा आपका, आराम से निकलेगा, मतलब एक वर्स को देखते देखते every day you will come to a new meaning, right? If you really go into the dissection of each verse and you go into the layers of meanings of Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is that sort of a language, right? That is the problem with it. It's a good thing and a bad thing, right? So Ved का तो छोड़ दो, Vedic Sanskrit is a completely different ball game altogether.
Totally.
बहुत अलग है. So I'll continue with this or.
Yes, please continue. Let's complete.
Yeah, so I will simply say that the Saturn must be at Rohini. For the Mahabharata war researcher, please don't do any of these other things. When you start taking Vishakha, you start taking here, there, everywhere. please, Saturn must be at Rohini. And now if it doesn't fit your plan and your preconceptions and bias and all that, wo baat alag hai. But Saturn must be at Rohini. And this I think I have pretty much explained it, shown it to reasonable satisfaction to everybody.
Yes.
Now, I just want to, because a lot of people have emailed me, given me private messages that, you talked, they tell me Dr. Subramanian Swami's show, absolutely wonderful discussion. But I talked about some of this, the Aryan invasion. And I won't say too much on this, but I want to just talk about that Surkotada horse. Ghode ko banaya gadha. That thing I want to just say exactly how it was done, right? Because this was an act of what do you call it? It was fraudology. इसमें research नहीं था.
We are here to debunk all these mythologies.
हाँ, वो बकवास है, मतलब बहुत बकवास है. And why it is बकवास? See, I just want to say that AIT, so Aryan invasion theorists, they succeeded for quite some time in deluding Indians. They deluded themselves also, they deluded Indians also, they deluded the rest of the world also. It happened for years and years. It's highly shameful. It's very unfortunate. And it is partly because of the colonialism. It's partly because of the Indian mentality at the time. It's because of the leftist, completely leftist outlook of Indian history, hundreds of things. But one of the key points is horse cannot be, must be originated from outside India. No domesticated horse ever found in India. Matlab, these things are there, and so the Surkotada horse. A.P. Sharma, and I was talking about A.P. Sharma ji to one of India's really good archaeologists called Rajesh Purohit, who is a absolutely genuinely good person and a very good scholar. And of course, leftist ने उसको भी काफी तकलीफ दिया है over the years, Rajesh Purohit. So this A.P. Sharma, he remained neglected, he's an Indian archaeologist. He discovered a horse's remains. They're from around 2000 BC. And he said it was a horse, and that was from basically this particular place, called Surkotada. It's a Harappan site. It's a period site in the Ran of Kutch. And look at what one of the Aryan invasion theory people said in 1987. And he rejected Sharmaji's claim altogether. And he said that it is likewise almost certainly a half ass,
albeit a large
one. मतलब घोड़े को बनाया गधा, मतलब था घोड़ा. It was a horse, and you made it into an ass, right? And you made an ass so they made an ass out of all of us also for a reasonable period of time. And these things happen, I mean, this is history. This it will be in the history textbooks at some stage, I hope. But at least now, from the medium of Sattology, from Dr. Subramanian Swami's channel, Virat Hindu Sangam, from other places, and in fact, on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere, now it is quite well known. This is a fraud which was conducted on Indians for a very long time. It was wrong. No, it was not right. And what it is, these things are very odd, how the truth comes to light. See, Hungarian archaeologist Sandor Bokonye was, he just like that, he came to New Delhi for a conference. And he looked at the bones which were excavated at Surkotada. And later on in the conference, he declared very clearly the occurrence of true horse, Equus caballus lin, was evidenced by the enamel, I'm quoting verbatim, by the enamel pattern of the upper and lower cheek and teeth, and by the size of and form of incisors and phalanges. No wild horses lived in India. Post-Pleistocene times, the domestic nature of the Surkotada horse is undoubtful. See, so now you see, suddenly घोड़ा becomes घोड़ा. गधा बन के फिर वापस घोड़ा बन गया वो, मतलब, right? And then he said, through a thorough study of the equid remains of prehistoric settlement of Surkotada Kutch under J.P. Joshi also, the occurrence of true horse, same thing, right? Supported by intermaxilla fragment whose incisor tooth shows clear signs of crib biting, a bad habit only existing amongst domestic horses not extensively used for war. Later on, of course, the terracotta horses were also found by S.R. Rao, another magnificent marine archaeologist. And you can see it so clearly now that all that evidence started to come out. Now the Aryan invasion people hadn't completely given up at that stage. They were sort of, they said, well, there was a next argument they used was spoked wheel must be there, in the chariots of the conquering Aryans, made the chariots far superior to the solid wheels used by the Harappans. Then वहां भी मतलब बेड़ा गर्क हो गया. So the whole argument sank again because Kalibangan, Rakhigadhi, the terracotta models of the chariots which were found show the spokes in the painted form. So there's no question. And now I think in fact there was a spoke chariot also which was found. So वो भी मतलब बेड़ा गर्क हो गया. So what I want to say simply, that all these things, eventually they come to light, right? I mean, it's been taken a long time. This is now 2020, right? It's become popular now that Surkotada horse and all these other things, घोड़े को बनाया गधा. This will become like, I think, quite a reasonably famous phrase, I think, in future. I think stop over here because I think we have there's a reasonable amount, but
you can complete it. Otherwise, we'll forget the reference. Maybe we'll do it next week.
Next week में कर लेंगे. अभी तो ये this is ongoing.
So Dr. Manish Pandit and rest of the viewers, and especially our all the viewers who are watching, we're all very grateful and we're very happy that you are explaining these things, because I really like Ramdas Singh, that book which you said, Murkhada. So we really want to talk about that also, because the same topic was told by Bhakti Vinod Thakur much later than Swami Ramdas.
Yeah, right.
And Vinod Thakur had said that sometimes a very high education makes an ass out of a man, intelligent man. So I'll stop there.
If I may just add it, the important thing there, which I think what he's trying to say, which I think Richard Feynman also said once, you see, you must not forget to think. You must not forget to think.
Yes.
सोचना मतलब सोच के मतलब वो भी भूल गया आप तो मतलब the faculty of logic and thinking you must not lose at any point. So rationality is important. Even when we are examining the so-called, what we are saying that, well, it occurred so long ago. But I want to just say, that these things, a lot of it now we can qualify, we can say, of course, in science, nothing is ever completely done. वो तो होता ही नहीं है in science, right? But to the best of our abilities, this is what we are coming to. So 3067 BCE for the Mahabharata is one of the most excellent timings which we can actually corroborate using all the evidences possible. Anyway, I'll go back to you.
भागवतम क्लास में बैठते बैठते मेरे को 3 से 6 घंटा बैठने की आदत हो गया है. कभी कभी कोई गुरु 6 घंटा सुनाते हैं कथा. So some people tell Bhagavad Katha for 6 hours. I didn't know church or any other place will do 6 hours non-stop Krishna Katha. But I have sat through a couple of them. So right. I have a big habit of listening. So Dr. Manish Pandit, what you were talking was music to my ears. And I really enjoying, relishing every single minute of it. And I also believe that don't misquote Mahabharata. If you don't understand, ask an expert. But don't create your own theories based on your interpretation.
Perfect.
Because interpretations destroy the spirit of Ganeshji, Vyasdev. It's a big insult to Vyasdev. So when you interpret something, that means as if like I am sitting in front of a real person, and whatever he's saying, and I'm saying this is not true. This is actually the meaning. Like when Krishna says that Aham sarvasya prabho matta sarvam pravartate. So he says that from me everything comes. And you're saying, and you say that the unborn within Krishna is talking. That's totally foolishness. Because who are we to judge Krishna? Who are we to interpret Krishna? When it's just because I am saying I am Aditya Satsangi. Now, if you say no, actually he meant something else. This is a big insult to me. So let us not misinterpret our Shastra. They are written.
हाईली इम्पोर्टेंट, हाईली इम्पोर्टेंट, हाईली इम्पोर्टेंट आदित्य जी, आप जो कह रहे हैं ये बिल्कुल मतलब 16 आने इसमें सच है। जो देखिए क्या है कि देर इज अ मायावाद ना, तो वो जो मायावाद हो जाता है वो उसमें पब्लिक मतलब माया में चले जाते हैं। अभी नॉट एवरीबडी कैन बी लाइक शतगोपा, राइट? दे एक्चुअली अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट एग्जैक्टली इज बीइंग सेड, व्हाट इज बीइंग नॉट सेड, एटसेट्रा। सो आई मीन that I have actually stopped bothering about those sort of people now completely. I don't bother about all that. हम अपना सुना लेते हैं, जिसको सुनना है वो सुन ले, इसको नहीं सुनना है वो I am very cool now, you know, आना है आओ, नहीं जाना है जाना है जाओ, मतलब हम मस्त अपना, you know, I'm just very cool now about the whole thing. I couldn't care less about it. So that's
So
very
thank you.
kind of you to call me. Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for watching this show. And just remember this point of Dr. Manish Pandit and me also, that Ramayana is written by Valmiki, approved by Bhagwan Ram himself, Valmiki Ramayana. So taking it factually, what is being told, if we don't understand, we question our own intellect and ask people who may know it. But misunderstanding and misquoting and trying to get your own meaning is dangerous, just dangerous from the point of view of explanation. Same thing goes with Mahabharata, same thing goes with Bhagavad Gita, same thing goes with Puran. Because many Puran people say there is a contradiction. But one thing I must tell you, Vedic scriptures are written by people whose intellect is way beyond ours. Aparushaya. That's the word to be used. We'll talk about it much later in detail, and Dr. Manish Pandit is very gracious to share with us as it is. So thank you and namaskar, and please keep joining the show.